Today we're going to do multiple transformations. So that means that we'll be doing more than one thing to a shape. So our learning target today is that we can identify multiple transformations. The things we'll look at are a mix of a translation, a reflection, and a rotation. Remember that all of them are rigid motions. So a rigid motion, it means that they're going to stay the same size, they're going to stay the same shape, the location on the grid will change, and the orientation may change. So take notes as you need. Use your graph paper to draw shapes if you find it helpful. We want to review what each individual shape is because we're going to apply more than one today. So make sure you understand those individual shapes. So what we would have would be a translation, would be where we take that individual shape and we just slide it in space. So you might remind yourself a translation is a slide. A reflection goes over some line of reflection. Oftentimes it's the axis, and it's considered a flip because it flips. And then a rotation, you have a center of rotation and you rotate it around. So see this trapezoid that is in green, it's like it's been rotated and kind of landed on its side. So it's turned either clockwise, remember clockwise means our clock would go this way, or counterclockwise. And our clockwise shorthand would be CW, and our counterclockwise would be CCW. So we'll look at several examples today. Our first example is that we are going to rotate a trapezoid 180 degrees about the origin. So this would be a good time for you to review what happens when you rotate it 180 degrees about the origin. Go back in your notes. You want to remember that 180 degrees, it doesn't matter if you go clockwise or counterclockwise. You can decide. So pause this video and look in your notes and see what happens when you rotate it around 180 degrees. So since you hopefully paused it, you will see that I now have put in my coordinates for this. And if you went back and looked in your notes, you'll remember that every XY, when we rotate it 180 degrees, goes and turns into the opposite. So negative X, negative Y. So I've labeled them all. So now I can go ahead and I can reflect or rotate it 180 degrees. So -1, -3 would be my H primed. And then -3, -2 would be my J primed. And -1, 0, this is where the 0 doesn't change, so my L primed. And my 3 doesn't change, or my 0 doesn't change, but my 3 does, so my K primed. And now I should have the exact same shape, only it has been rotated in space. Notice it has gone from quadrant number 1 mostly to quadrant number 3. And quadrant number 3 is that -X, -Y. Now it asks us to reflect it across the X and Y axis in that order. So, well, in the Y axis first. So we'll take that Y axis and I'm going to draw and say, here's my Y axis. And this is where things start to get messy. So switching colors, etc. is going to help you. So I'm going to go ahead and erase the original coordinates because they're not needed for me. And I'm just looking at that second shape. So it says it's reflected across the Y-axis. I'll pick a new color. And remember, this is where we fold in and then fold out. And I'll call it H double primed. And go in 3 and go out 3. We'll call it J double primed. K. Look at this, it ends up back where it started, and L, it ends up back where it started. So now we have our reflection, and I'll just put the double primes there. Now it says reflected across the x-axis. So I'm gonna need another color. I'm gonna do yellow on the axis, and then I'm gonna reflect it, and look where it goes. Can you kind of imagine where it's gonna fold when I go in and then back out? It's gonna land right on itself. So when I reflect it back, this would be our triple primed, and I would have it right back on itself. So this is a good time where if you have colored pencils or pens, you might enjoy using them for your multiple transformations. Let's look at another one. So sometimes they give you an example already done and they ask you some questions about it. So in a case like this, we need to try out all the options to see which one will make A go to B. So you've got to actually go through them all. So reflect figure A on the y-axis and then followed in the x-axis. So let's go ahead and do it. So figure A in the y-axis, and you're going to see I might be a little sloppy about this and say, okay, what's the least amount of work I can get away with to see what is actually going to happen? I can start to reconstruct that reflection. So I'm able to tell it would fold here. And now we reflect the x-axis. I can tell immediately that it is not going to be this because that point's in the middle. So I'll go ahead and erase. It cannot be letter A. So we'll cross it off. Translate figure A 6 units to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everybody moves 6 points. So then I can kind of construct based on that 1 point. Again, looking for the least amount of work I can do if I'm going to have to do this every single time. Now I reflect it across the x-axis, so I can tell that shape is not going to be the same. I'm going to go in 1 and then out 1. Not going to work. So this is not going to work as well. All right, rotate 180 degrees and then reflect. Ooh, so that's fun. Now, rotating, remember from the last slide, xy becomes negative x, negative y. So I'll take my coordinate. This would be -2, +1. And I need to switch both of them. So now I'm going to have 2, -1. I do actually need to ask you to stop here and consider this because I don't want to do more work than I have to. It says rotate figure A about the origin 180 degrees. Well, if I'm going to get the figure landing in quadrant 3 right now, and then I'm going to follow it with a reflection in the x-axis, I would expect it to be up here. Figure B is not up there. So right now, unless I made an error, I'm thinking it's got to be D. But I'm still going to make sure D happens so that I can be certain. So now it says reflect figure A in the y-axis. So we've kind of started that before, but I'll show this. And now I can, again, do the least amount of work possible. I'm flipping on the y-axis. So here we go. Now we rotate it 90 degrees clockwise. So a good time for you to pause and say, what's going to happen when I go 90 degrees clockwise? And this is where your point goes from x, y, and the points switch. So x, y, and it goes to y, and then the opposite of what x was. Okay, so we're ready to do it. So we start with 2, 1, and we're going to flip them, and you're going to turn your x negative. So 1, -2. Okay, so we start with 3, 4, 5, 1. So then it would be flipping it. So 5, 1 would be 1, and we flip to -5. So 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's enough for me that we know it's going to be letter D. I think these are kind of fun because you're ruling it out. Example, which should our last example 3, because I did a duplicate of that slide by mistake, tells us to do the rotation and then figure out what the translation is. So here we go. We've got our translation and our rotation, but we have to do the rotation first. So it says draw the image after a rotation and label it A primed, B primed, C primed. So again, it's a rotation. What is the rotation? It says it's 90 degrees counterclockwise. So you have to remember what's going to happen with your XY point. What will it turn into if it goes 90 degrees counterclockwise? And what is 90 degrees counterclockwise? So 12, 3, 6, and 9. Remember, you're going this way. So you would expect you're going to get from quadrant 2 to quadrant 3. Okay. So when it's 90 degrees counterclockwise, your XY becomes -YX. Okay, so they get reversed and your Y becomes negative. So my -7, +3, I'm going to just draw this, -7, +3, gets reversed. So it'd be -3, -7, -3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, and then my -2, +3, so -2, +3 gets reversed, and it becomes -3, -2. So -3, -2 would be our C primed. And then our A primed is going to be -7. It starts as -7, 6. So -7, 6. We'll reverse it, which would be -6, -7 with that rule. So -6, -7, A primed. So here's our triangle. We can see it was rotated, and we can see that it went from quadrant 2 to quadrant 3. Now I'm going to go ahead and erase this so I have space, and it says describe the translation needed to go from A prime, B prime, C prime to D, E, F. Okay, so I have to recognize that A primed lines up with D. So what's happening to get from A prime to D? I'm just going to check. I'll count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like it's going up 5, so I'd have my Y is going +5. And it looks like it is going over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So my X is going to the right. The right means it's positive, so it'd be X + 9. Explain how you found your answer. Well, I would say that I counted up from my A primed to the corner that corresponds with it, and I would have that I counted how many steps to the right or to the left. So now this time our practice will be a worksheet, so you'll get that worksheet and you'll get to practice that on paper. I think it's important that we get that opportunity to practice on paper.